Hey, everybody. So glad to be with you this evening. Glad to be back. Going to try to start our regular routine again. As y'all can see, I'm sitting here right next to my beautiful bride.
If we have anybody out there that can, in the comments, tell us whether they can hear us or not. We tried to make sure we're not muted, but we don't have each other to check with to see if we're getting out there. Let's see if we got any comments yet. Y'all let us know if you can hear us and where you're watching from in the comments. And if you can't hear us, put that in the comments too. I don't know how to do that. Okay.
Wanda says
we can hear.
Okay.
That's the main thing right there. Okay. So everybody can hear us, and we don't really even need to be seen for that matter. But we can be heard. We're okay.
Now we've got a great resumption of where we left off a couple of weeks ago when we paused for the last 2 weeks. I hope everybody had a great.
Tell them where we are. Not exactly, but
we are
close to an undisclosed location in Ruidoso, New Mexico. So I hope we've got good internet, good enough to get out.
I think we've got good enough internet.
Okay.
Now, last week was a 250th birthday of our country, and oh my goodness, so many celebrations and comments we received and texts we received, and so we hope everybody enjoyed themselves. We just did not feel like we needed to come in on top of that. So,
well, don't tell what we didn't do. Let's just do something.
Yeah.
Let's just get started.
Let's kicked off. Yeah, we've got plenty of viewers already started with us tonight.
Yeah, we're titled this tonight "Perfectly Imperfect," and I hope that by the end of this we understand why we chose this name. But let's see. And I'm working with these glasses, y'all. Again, we are looking at all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for kind of a harmonized study of this. And we're just kind of telling the story as it happened. We are going to give some references, but we get a much fuller picture this way for this particular study.
Well, yeah, especially the last few days of Jesus' life on earth. It was much better to try to do a broad.
So we've talked about the walk and talk where they went through and he kind of gave them last minute instructions after the Last Supper. We've talked about the upper room. We've talked about the Last Supper. We've talked about actually the trial of Jesus and the questioning and how different all that was between where the Jews questioned him and the
Roman
religious leaders, and then the Romans. So that was eye opening. If you didn't see those podcasts, go back and look at those. We're actually to the point last week that Jesus was crucified, and we talked about the man who carried his cross. We learned some interesting things about that. We learned a lot about the thieves. I feel like even Barabbas. How I'm Barabbas, you're Barabbas. That we should have been.
We're all Barabbas.
Should have died, but Jesus was the one that did, and how this was all the underlying thing would have to be that this was all his plan. None of this is catching Jesus by surprise, but boy, did it catch the disciples by surprise, and some of them RUNNOFT. They run
it off.
Yeah, they denied Jesus. They ran. They panicked, and they were not expecting. We talked about their expectations, but we kind of talked about just a little bit about after the crucifixion, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more tonight, because last week, as this slide says, was the darkest moment in human history. Jesus willingly gave his life on the cross. We've studied prophecy after prophecy after prophecy, and it's not going to stop. Jesus is still fulfilling prophecy. He declared, you say it,
tetelestai.
I can't say it, but that meant it is finished on the cross, and then he
It is
the
finished,
price.
paid in full.
Hmm.
Nothing else to be done.
Yep.
And
Done deal.
as a matter of fact, we touched on that in our Wednesday noon Bible study this past week about, is there anybody who was under the misimpression that there was anything you could add to what Jesus did on that cross for your salvation?
Yes,
And
that's a good point. Very
yes,
good point.
everybody agreed. No, Jesus did all that could be done. Our only contribution is do we receive it personally?
That's good. I want to talk a little bit about the tomb because we hear about Joseph of Arimathea, and we hear about again Nicodemus, but they courageously, and we'll get into that in a second, claimed his body, wrapping him in linen and spices and placing him in a new tomb before the Sabbath began. The religious leaders sealed the tomb and posted Roman guards, believing they could prevent any possibility of deception. Now that's a broad overview of the tomb, but I think there's some things we need to unpack here just a little bit. First of all, Joseph, what we can know. We can't know everything, but we can know some things because the scriptures tell us that he was a rich man. He was from Arimathea, which is likely a Judean town northwest of Jerusalem. He was a member of the Jewish council and the Sanhedrin. I want to believe he was a Sadducee because he was rich, and so many of the Sadducees were rich.
And we've studied the
But we
difference
don't
between
know for
the
sure.
Pharisees, Sadducees, the Essenes. The Sadducees were mainly from wealthy families, powerful families, connected families, and they didn't believe in an afterlife, which would make
Interesting.
Joseph of Arimathea unusual.
Well, that might be also why Luke calls him a good and righteous man.
Yeah.
And
Luke, he had to break from if he were a Sadducee, he had to break from their.
No matter if he was Pharisee or Sadducee, he had to break from a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
He and Nicodemus.
That's
but
true.
The reason I want to believe he was a Sadducee is because I know Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and I'm saying that the Baptists and the Methodists can work together.
There you go.
I'm y'all. There's no proof. I'm just saying. But Luke also says he had not consented to the council's decision and action in condemning Jesus. He's one of the ones that said he's got to have a good, fair trial. And it says he was waiting for the kingdom of God. And what we just touched on that. He did the Sadducees wouldn't have believed in an afterlife. So that does give a little bit of evidence he might be a Pharisee, but not a whole lot. But John tells us that he was a disciple of Jesus, but he was secretly a disciple of Jesus because he
feared backlash.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. In Mark 15:43, it says he took courage and went to Pontius Pilate to ask for Jesus' body.
Yeah, babe, before you swap that slide, folks, whenever you see us having given you a lot of bullet points like this, always remember you can go back and pause the screen so that you can go and in your own Bibles highlight these passages, mark these passages, and study them in depth. We're giving them to you, but in our podcast, you can pause them and take your notes from them. So just want to remind you of that.
Well, here we're talking about the risk. We've already talked about this a little bit, but what's he doing here by claiming the body? He is publicly identifying himself with an executed criminal. That's the way they wanted to look at Jesus. He's risking his reputation on the Sanhedrin. He's risked ceremonial uncleanness. Remember, we're about to have a high Sabbath.
Touching his dead body.
And he also risked Roman suspicion because they're the ones executed it, and he's asking for the body. But, here ironically, we see that the disciples had scattered, but a previously secret disciple
became bold. Well, and if y'all recall, the Roman soldier standing at the cross when the earthquake hit and the sun went dark for 3 hours. He says, in the veil in the temple tore from top to bottom, talking about the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And, the Roman soldier looked up and said, truly, this was the Son of God. Well, all that transpired on that crucifixion day, during that crucifixion period of Jesus the Christ, I'm sure there were a lot of people that were rethinking things. Now, it turns out after the fact that the Sanhedrin, their attitude, almost to a person, did not change, because they didn't slow down. They went after the rest of the disciples. They put a couple of them to death, ran them out of Jerusalem. So for them, the religious leaders, not much changed. But he saw this as a moment to take action. And it was risky, but there probably wasn't any better time to do it than now, because there was so much second guessing, so much rethinking things from most everybody but the Sanhedrin. Go ahead, sir.
Did Pilate have to release the body? That was a question I had. Did he have to give them the body? It says that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus went and asked for it. But I found out that normally families had no automatic right to reclaim the body, and they weren't even family.
Not even of a convicted criminal, no.
Yeah. So it's pretty obvious that Pilate, he wanted confirmation, first of all, that Jesus had actually died. Mark records that he summoned the centurion who confirmed Jesus' death, and only then did he release the body. So he wanted to make sure he was dead. This detail is important historically because it demonstrates here, the Roman verification of death, because so many things had to fall into place for this to be so as solid as it is. Because somebody could have said, well, they didn't break his legs, they didn't do this, they thought he was dead, he wasn't dead.
And all that was according to prophecy. For prophecy to be fulfilled, things had to happen just like they actually happened, and were recorded by not only the writers of the Gospels, but extra biblical writers as well, in Jewish writings.
And two, there was official governmental knowledge of his death here. So details about the tomb. This was very interesting to me. Matthew tells us it was his own new tomb, and when I say his own new tomb, that's Joseph of Arimathea. John adds another important detail, saying that it had never been used. It was cut out of solid rock. It was located in a garden near Golgotha. So it matters because from the research that I've done, tombs varied. So a rich man could afford to hire someone, or professional tomb diggers, to hew this out of a solid piece of rock.
Right.
And they might even, if they were doing this for one person, it would just hold that one person, and then they could have a heavy stone. So you can imagine they might have been buried with some of their riches or what have you, and grave robbers, would come along.
Yeah, couldn't mess.
So this was important for a rich person, but only available probably to a rich person. They might even later on have adjoining tombs built into that one
for family members.
Yeah, but this was a new tomb. It only had room for one person. It had one way in, one way out, and it was
never
stone.
been occupied.
Yeah, so there could be no confusion about whose body was inside it. They put one body in, they rolled the stone. Right. No previous remains were there, and the location was known. It was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, a new tomb that he had. Maybe the gospel went around the neighborhood. You saw Joseph's new tomb, didn't you? I don't know, something like that. But
before you change that, when Snar said that in studying about tombs for proper burial, she said the circumstances of tombs varied widely. That is probably an understatement, because not everybody could afford to dig tombs, carve out tombs, and
Some used natural
some
caves,
some use natural
which could
caves,
have ways
which,
in and out and go way down in
which could
there.
have multiple chambers, which could come out somewhere else. And so you risk, if you use one of those tombs because you were poor, you risk somebody coming along from somewhere that you couldn't see and messing with the body, gathering up valuables, stealing the valuables from the body, and that sort of thing. And so that's would be much more common for the common people. And so that's why these details in the
Well,
Bible
a
about
criminal wouldn't even. I don't even.
this criminal probably wouldn't even get a tomb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But look, even here, more prophecy is fulfilled. In Isaiah 53:9, he was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. That is 700 years before it happened. 700 years. Jesus died among criminals. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, or a death with the wicked, yet was buried in the unused tomb of a wealthy man. 700 years Isaiah was written before.
Yep.
And there's just layer after layer. What about Nicodemus? Nicodemus was directly involved. It says so. John alone does record his participation, but this is the same Nicodemus that's introduced in John 3. Remember, he came to Jesus at night. He was cautious, kind of on the sly, and he asked sincere questions about being born again. How can I be born again? He said, born of the Spirit. Just explain that to him. And also we see Nicodemus mentioned in John. May have had some special association that he knew of Nicodemus in a way other people didn't, because he also talks about Nicodemus quietly defending Jesus before the Pharisees and saying that Jesus deserved a fair hearing.
Well,
he and Joseph did.
And y'all remember, we have said many times that this was the time, based on the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, this was the time that they expected the Messiah to appear. They just didn't know, is he going to be the suffering servant Messiah? Is he going to be a military Messiah? Assuming the throne of King David. They just weren't sure. And it's almost like, for the religious leaders, they really didn't care, because if the Messiah came, he was going to upset their apple cart.
Yeah.
But Nicodemus, I believe, had a genuine heart.
Yeah.
And he wanted to go and say, if this Jesus is the Messiah that we seek, is Jesus the Messiah that we expect? Because, like we said before, there's a couple of times in the passages where they make reference to a plethora of messiahs that supposedly showed up around this time, and they were talking about, this one, he died out, this other one got killed, and his movement went away, and nothing ever came of it. So leave Jesus alone, because if he's just like the others, that's all that's going to happen anyway. It'll all wash out.
And if it does happen to be, he says, God, then who are we to be fighting against God?
Exactly. Exactly. So don't forget, this is the time of the expected Messiah. So it's not unusual that Nicodemus, having a genuine heart, he was really trying to find out.
He's seeking. He was seeking. And he does what I call here making commitment public.
Mm-hmm.
Because when he goes,
when we went to him the first time, he was as scared to death to be found out. He did it at night, arranged a private meeting, and here, he's pulling the lid off.
Yeah, but he definitely is, because John says that he brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds of it. 75 pounds. And depending on the translation, 75 Roman pounds is still 65 to 75 modern pounds for us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an unbelievable amount, because This is not ordinary. This is not normal. This resembled what you would do for a king. This is for royalty, would have had that kind of, and you know, they didn't, the
That's why I
Jews
say,
did
I
not
believe,
embalm.
yeah, I
They did
believe
not.
Nicodemus's heart was in the right place, and
Well,
he was rewarded.
He's making a public statement. Have you ever seen anybody make a huge public contribution to a politician?
Mhm.
They're making a statement though.
Yeah.
If they do that, they're all in.
Mhm.
So it's he's sending a message. Not only that, but I believe he really wanted to honor Jesus.
Well, that's my
Yeah.
point. That's
Mhm.
where his heart was. Now he's convinced.
Yeah, but he was not backing down. He was
Yeah.
not. He was not in the shadows anymore. But it says that they worked together. He says Joseph took the body, Nicodemus took the spices, and together they removed Jesus from the cross, which was Pharisees and Sadducees. I don't care who you were. They didn't touch dead bodies. You know, they did that. They wrapped him in linen. They prepared him according to Jewish burial customs now, and they placed him in the tomb, rolled the stone across the entrance. I'm not saying they had all the time they wanted to do it, but they did it, which brings up some questions I have later. But because of sunset, you know, we think of our days from midnight to midnight that way. Theirs was from sunset to sunset.
Right, 6 p.m. to 6 p.m.
So you have to look at that when you're looking at a lot of the scripture to interpret it properly. But they only had a limited amount of time because it says Jesus died at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
So the burial narrative here is something I don't want to tell you I know this answer, but I want you to think about this for yourself, is what I'm going to say, because I don't know if anybody's ever done this before, but we got a problem here with the traditional view of a Friday crucifixion. And let me go through this.
No. I'm shaking my head because
Okay, let me go through
you know,
it.
for
Because
so long we've got to understand what really happened, not what culture says happened.
Let's look at it as if we're really trying to figure this out, because we can do this.
Yeah.
You know, we not exactly, but we can have a better idea, I think. Because the crucifixion on Friday, which was preparation day, then to say that Saturday is the Sabbath and then resurrection early Sunday, if you do it that way, Friday 3 p.m. to Sunday 6:30 even a.m. or 6 a.m., 39 hours. That is not 3 days and 3 nights. So what we might not have known when we were younger is there's more than one Sabbath involved here. There's something called a high Sabbath. It's the first day of unleavened bread. And so if you factor this into the equation, you get a much better idea of how Jesus was probably crucified. And I'm giving you alternative view number 1 because this is where I started out. But I have kind of leaned toward the next
To somewhere else.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay. So crucifixion on Thursday,
I'm
preparation day.
withholding my comment.
Okay, withhold, and I think I can debate you on this one. But high Sabbath on Friday, you know, this is they had to hurry because of the high Sabbath on Friday.
Pause a second.
I'm never
Folks,
gonna get
we
through
have
this.
said so many times, we are thousands of miles away geographically, and we are thousands of years away in time. We are so blinded by our westernized culture and expectations of things. So what Sonara's bringing you is stuff that you may very well have never heard from a pulpit or from a Sunday school book or from any other Bible study that you've been in. But it's the real stuff. So
Let me try to get through this. It's complicated.
it is.
It is complicated. Let me try to do it without interruption, okay? So high Sabbath on Friday, which is what I'm telling you, is a real thing in the Jewish culture. And then they also have a weekly Sabbath. This is the regular Sabbath,
Which was the Saturday.
every Saturday, right? And then resurrection before dawn on Sunday, possibly after sunset on Saturday, okay? Now, this is the view that comes the closest to me to the literal reading of 3 days and 3 nights, and it explains the 2 Sabbaths distinctly.
And this is
I
the
do,
one.
okay. I do have a question about this one,
Okay.
but this is why I only have one little question about this one. All right, crucifixion on Wednesday, high Sabbath on Thursday, so nobody can do anything. First day of unleavened the bread. They have an ordinary work day on Friday, and it says that the women buy and prepare spices, but it does not say they did it on Friday. I can't understand why they didn't go over there on Friday if that was the case, but I'm not sure how long it took them to prepare and buy these spices. They didn't have Walmart. They didn't have a car to go to Walmart. They didn't have a grinding machine. They probably did all this by hand. So it may have taken them the most of the day on Friday to buy and prepare those spices. Then the weekly Sabbath, well, they couldn't go the next day. So they went first thing before dawn on Sunday.
Yeah. After the end of Sabbath on Saturday at 6 p.m.
This is it. Now, I asked a whole lot of questions of ChatGPT and everything I could research. If we could know in the year Jesus was crucified what day that high Sabbath fell on, I thought, okay, I've got this. I'm going to figure this out. But the problem is they don't know exactly which year it was.
Which year it was.
And there's arguments for different years. And then I asked, why are you only considering those? There's 2 years in between that. Then there were more reasons why you could muddle the whole thing there. So not knowing exactly is not the problem. I think just not having that argument that that's not 3 days. This does help me. This does help me. Even though I may not know exactly, it's just important to remember here. These are the three most commonly discussed, possibilities. And each one is trying to harmonize. And people have even made really good arguments for the Friday crucifixion. I don't
see how.
I know. I've looked at it. They're in their heart. I think they're trying their best. But the main thing, nothing changes the truth that Jesus died for our sins. He was buried and he rose again. Yes. We can't get too bogged down in all this.
No.
But for anybody who has, like me, gone Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning, what is going on?
There ain't 3 days.
I never knew about that high Sabbath thrown in there.
Well, and there again, it's a case of this is Passover week.
Yes.
This is Passover week. That's a fact that most people don't take into account. But when you start taking into account Passover week, and Jesus had to be the Passover lamb, then you start saying, well, there's no way he could have died on the Friday.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so when you start trying to throw it all in there, and then again, we've told y'all several times that now instead of, BC and AD was always historically during our lifetimes always understood that 0 was the year Jesus was born.
Yeah.
But the problem is it was matched to the Gregorian calendar, which traces back to earlier Roman calendars. And now most scholars believe that Jesus was actually born in 4 BC.
Yeah.
Not 0.
There are so many factors in this that it's really, really hard to pin this down. But doesn't that help you to know that there is an explanation? I mean, just to see all the moving parts of this.
Yes,
because so many people have tried to argue that none of this is true because Jesus wasn't even in the grave 3 days. I mean,
and the thing about it is Christians are attacked oftentimes because they've never studied this, and so they have no defense when they say, well, there's no way he was crucified on Friday and was already out of the tomb on Sunday morning. There's no way.
So now all that I have studied, I'm going to say, don't ask me this question if you don't want me to give you the answer, because it's going to be long.
It's going to be involved.
And it's going to be complicated.
But that is a lot more likely to be the actual history.
Yeah.
The more we've learned about the calendars and the feast days and the fact it was Passover week. Exactly.
Yeah.
And for me, this is for me. I studied how we got Good Friday. I studied how we got
You asked the question.
Easter. I studied how we got, uh, all of that from the perspective of the, people can't see this, from the history of the church going back toward the time of these things actually happening. And you find out that the establishment church, the organized church at the time, sometimes they just made arbitrary decisions.
Yeah, yeah.
They made decisions to fit certain things.
Sometimes they had agendas to go with those.
Sometimes they had agendas. And that's what made me start questioning.
I want to know the truth. I just want to know the truth.
Anyway, go ahead.
This was another interesting thing for me, and this is a really big rabbit hole for some people. But I think it's something worth asking ourselves. The 3 days, and 3 nights. Where was Jesus? Well, first of all, Jesus' body was in the tomb.
Yes.
That his physical body was in the tomb. That's easy. Joseph and Nicodemus buried his physical body in the tomb. We don't have to ask that. He wasn't walking around physically in a human body. But his spirit was not in the tomb. And Jesus himself tells us this, to the repentant thief. What did he say on the cross?
Today, you will be with me in paradise.
Truly, I tell you.
Truly.
So Jesus had the expectation that his spirit would move on that very day to exist. So where paradise is, that's a whole nother question. But Jesus expected his conscious existence to continue that very day in paradise.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. So Jesus committed his spirit to the Father. His final recorded words in Luke were, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Where's paradise? Evidently is with the Father. See that? He breathed his last and his spirit departed his body. So main view, I would say, held by many conservative scholars. I guess we're a conservative scholar. Are we? Anyway, after his death, Christ proclaimed his victory, I believe, to imprisoned spiritual beings. Often, and I think we both agree on this, it makes perfect sense, understood as fallen angels associated with Genesis 6. And I'm going to get into the details of this just a minute. So Ephesians adds another passage. It says he descended into the lower parts of earth, and that's referring to Psalm 68:18, actually, right there. But Peter gives us another important piece. He says he was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he also went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. Now, several interpretations of this passage or translations of this passage exist. This is where I think people have gotten a little bit messed up on this, because in the King James Version, it actually says went and preached unto the spirits.
Preached has a connotation of you have a possibility of salvation.
Evangelism.
Yeah.
Suggesting evangelism. So then
the better word
but the better ones, when they did it, the NIV said went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits. ESV went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. And NASB even says went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison. So modern translations, proclaimed emphasizes an announcement, or a declaration,
not an invitation to be saved. No.
Not an offer of salvation. The Greek word is actually caruso, which is to proclaim, announce, or herald. When I think herald, I think blowing of a trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
I think dun 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 dun,
mm-hmm.
and a victory. I think it is a proclamation of victory.
Yes,
is what he did. And now
go back to Genesis 3:15, people. Genesis 3:15.
And now there are. I want to go back just a second. There are other theories on this, and I just couldn't bring myself to put them on here. I don't really know.
We don't want anybody led astray.
Yeah. 1 Peter 3:18-22, I want to read this. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits. And this is where, to me, it's just so clear. I don't understand how anybody can get anything else. It says, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. Now, we've all studied the ark, what was being destroyed, what was going on, the fallen angels, the daughters of men.
The angels who
Nephilim.
sinned. That's
Yeah.
where they're described.
So I don't see how this is not so clear. I guess if you can't believe that, maybe you have to figure something else out.
There are reasons why the church introduced around 400 to 500 A.D. the idea that Genesis 6, 1 through 5 did not actually talk about angels. It was talking about the line of Seth.
Sethite being.
That was something that came way after. In Jesus' day, they had no misunderstanding. Everybody knew that it was talking about
that's a whole other thing. We've been over that before, and anybody who's been with us knows this. So we're kind of going with this. Let me finish just reading scripture though. I'm not adding anything to this. It says while the ark was being built, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And then this scripture says this, and this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also, not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot right there.
Yes.
That is a lot. Wow. Did Jesus descend into hell? Because, we've talked about this before, but this depends entirely on what somebody means by hell. We've talked about a lot in this podcast about the gates of hell, Gehenna, all those types of things. But if by hell people are meaning the place of eternal punishment, Gehenna, the lake of fire, Scripture does not say that Jesus went there to suffer. Jesus didn't go down there to suffer.
No, he went for the purpose Peter said, which was to proclaim to the angels who had sinned in Genesis 6, because they were immediately judged. They were thrown into chains, and Peter uses the phrase Tartarus. It's the only place in Scripture Tartarus was used. Well, every Greek-speaking person in the world at that time had no misunderstanding whatsoever what he was talking about. And what we refer to Tartarus as is like super hell. Now, not
Hades, Sheol, the realm of the dead.
And they don't describe it as the burning fire or whatever. They're talking about it is so dark.
The lower regions
that light cannot escape
the realm of the dead.
Yes.
But it's not necessarily the place of eternal torment.
Right.
Where he went. So what was he doing? The Bible gives hints for sure, but it does not give a detailed chronology. But we do know his body rested in the tomb. His spirit was alive and moving. He was with the Father. He promised the thief paradise. He proclaimed victory to imprisoned spirits, however one understands that passage. And on the third day, his spirit reunited with his glorified body.
Yes.
In that tomb. So we're kind of getting to the part now that we kind of left off with last time about the faithful women. Meanwhile, the women who had been following Jesus, and we just talked about this in one of our timelines, that it says that they prepared additional spices. I understand there was already 75 pounds of spices in that tomb, but this is personal. This is personal. This is somebody coming up and laying something in the casket. This is a personal honoring, I believe, is what they were doing. I used to think that they had thrown Jesus up in that tomb just as fast as they could and roll that thing. Sabbath was coming, and that he had not been properly prepared, and that the women were going back to do that. But I don't really believe that anymore. And if you study the scripture, it tells you that he was prepared in the Jewish tradition. He had 75 pounds of spice in that room with him, but the women didn't feel like that was enough. They didn't want Nicodemus and Joseph. He was personal to them. He was theirs. They wanted to go and do this for him. They were family. They were like family. Yeah.
Yeah.
An act of love. It was complete an act of love. And that brings us to one of the greatest mornings in history, for sure. The question was no longer whether Jesus had died. He died. Everyone agreed that. But the question was, what happened next? Because if this is the end of the story, that Jesus died for our sins, and that was it, that's great. But that's not even the end.
It would have been just like the old annual, the once a year sacrifice that the high priest had to do, and he had to do it every year because instant the ashes were blown away, the scapegoat was let out into the wilderness. Guess what? Somebody somewhere in the nation of Israel had already started sinning again.
Yeah.
So the nation needed salvation a year down the road.
It would have been so easy for him to have just been looked at as a prophet, even if he was a Messiah. Mm-hmm. But that's not what happened.
No.
But I want to read I know we're studying all four, and we're putting them together, but just for 1 second, I want to separate these out just so you get an idea of what you would be looking at if you read all four Gospels before sunrise. It says, Matthew says, after the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. All right. Mark says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who's going to roll away that big stone? Okay, they forgot. And then Luke says, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they prepared and went to the tomb. John says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, he says while it was still dark. So that tells you it's really early. Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So you get four different perspectives of what happened if you read each of these Gospels. They don't contradict each other. I think they support each other. Like if one of the women came back and talked to this person and said, you ain't gonna believe what we saw. This is what happened. And then this one said something else. They're saying the same thing, but they don't report that all the women that went, you see what I'm saying? I think that's a good example, to see there. But women did become the first resurrection witnesses. The same women at the cross became the first witnesses at the tomb. And I think we touched on this last podcast, but in an ancient world, if you wanted to make an airtight, solid story, you would not use women as the witnesses. Because women didn't carry the weight of a man's word in that time, in that tradition. Not that they were liars, it's just that it didn't happen.
That was the culture at the time.
But God uses imperfection to perfect his plan, doesn't he? Yeah, all four Gospels preserve this fact. Nobody says, and there was a man with them. Nobody says that. They tell it like it is because they're telling the truth. I think it just lends credibility.
It's just like we said about the disciples. Nobody would be so self-deprecating if they were trying to fabricate a concoction that is wholly made up and has no basis at all. They wouldn't paint themselves as such unflattering.
Yes, this was not a culturally advantageous story It was not. Not, but it was the truth, and that's why
So
I
they
believe
told.
it's reported this way. But their expectations, Keith. We talk about expectations all the time because I like to put myself in the position of people, in these times and things that would have happened. They've got spices to anoint for a dead body. They are thinking there's going to be a stone in front of that tomb. I don't think they had knowledge that a guard had been placed.
No, because they were. If the guards were there,
They weren't going
at
to let
least
them
they
leave.
had some he-men to help get the stone out of the way.
Well, I don't know that they would have let them. I don't think that they knew they were there.
No, I'm just saying. But your point about they had no knowledge that the guards were placed there is because they're saying, "Who's going to help us roll away the stone?"
Right. The last minute, somebody said, "Oh my gosh, it's a big old stone."
Yeah.
What are we going to get? How are we going to get that stone? If you're right, I see what you're saying now. Yeah, but they were going to. Their expectations were that there was a dead body behind that stone.
Yeah.
Um,
And they'd worry about getting the stone out of the way when you got there.
So it says, when the Sabbath was over, and this is out of Mark, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so they might go anoint Jesus' body. Very early on, the first day of the week, and we know that's a Sunday, just after sunrise, which would have been when they were allowed to do this because of the Sabbath. They were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. So at the tomb, what do they see at the tomb? There's an angel said to the woman, this is Matthew, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. And also in Luke, this is very similar. Y'all can read this, Luke 24:5-7. This account that Luke tells, it says they didn't find the body. They were wondering about this, and suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down to the ground, or with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you? I mean, while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again. And then they remembered his words. I don't know. This is an unusual detail. John 20:11-12. Mary stood outside the tomb crying. She saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. Know where I'm going with this?
We covered that before.
Yeah, the connection to the Ark of the Covenant. The arks, the mercy seat, described in Exodus, is where the blood was placed to make atonement on the Day of Atonement, that for the sins of the people. Now here's that stone.
That bench. That bench where Jesus' body lay, and one angel at one end and one angel at the other end.
Mm-hmm. And that particular piece of temple furniture, or whatever you want to call it, which contained, the Ten Commandments and other things. But God instructed Moses to make those exactly like that. He told them to put two cherubim or angels of gold, one at each end of the mercy seat, their wings overshadowing the place where atonement was represented. And God said, there, between the two cherubim, I will be with you. The imagery, just the imagery, that the invited imagery here, he does not say, John does not say that this is the Ark of the Covenant. Doesn't say that, but
it's definitely the imagery.
I mean, it just has to be. It just has to be. The empty tomb, John 20, additional detail that he gives. Mary Magdalene believes that someone has stolen the body of Jesus. She runs to tell Peter and John. They race to the tomb. John arrives first and hesitates. Peter goes straight inside, and he enters. And it says he saw and believed. And it says the grave clothes remain lying there. This isn't evidence of grave robbery. Because what? What thief unwraps a body before he steals it?
Wouldn't have taken time.
Who would do that? But the orderly grave clothes point to something entirely different here. The guards report, Keith. This is kind of, I really never studied this, all that much. What's our time looking like?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay. The guards report, I'm just going to read, only Matthew talks about this. None of the other Gospels do, so we don't have anything else we can look at. But it says, while the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. Okay. Well, when the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this report gets to the governor, we'll satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." Okay. So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story, scripture says this, and this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. And Matthew's writing this later in his life. And this is still a story that people circulate, that guards fell asleep, the disciples came and got Jesus' body. And I asked a lot of questions about this and did some research about it, but which would be easier? To display the body of Jesus and say, "We told you he's dead," or to persuade people to believe a story that even the soldiers themselves couldn't logically explain? The religious leaders chose the latter. They're going to put that story out there. If there was a body of Jesus, where was it? Why didn't they display it? Why didn't they go find it? There was. That's because he was risen. The empty tomb reminds me, I hope it reminds all of us, though, that God's promises do not depend on our expectations. And that goes so many ways. What God is going to do is not dependent on what our expectations are. I'm sure there are some things we can expect. We can accept that we may be saved if we believe. There are things that we can rely on. I'm not saying that. But even when his followers could not imagine what he was about to do, even though he was telling them,
He told them a bunch of times,
and the angels reminded them, he was already accomplishing exactly what he had promised. Perfectly imperfect. I hope we can see, how God delights in using the imperfect to carry out his perfect plan. You look at, the women were scurrying around doing spices for a dead body that was risen. Just on and on and on. All the Peter's denying. All these imperfect people, because the resurrection wasn't trusted to perfect people. It was trusted to faithful people. Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm saying. Okay, that's what I got. I know you got comments.
Well, we're going to post a video that Michael Knowles did. How many of you have heard of the Shroud of Turin?
Michael Knowles?
Michael Knowles, yeah.
Okay.
You and I watched that video.
Okay.
It's been studied, it's been mocked, it's been put up as a fake or forgery. Guess what? I wasn't there when it was created, allegedly, any of the times, whether it was real or fake. Sonara wasn't there either. But neither were any of y'all. So all we can do is go by the evidence. And what I can tell you is that shroud was studied. It was allowed to be studied, but it was under very limited circumstances in the 1980s. And the person who was the loudest of the group announced that it was a fake. that it was not real. Well, I can assure you that just like how much we now know, remember we in our creation corner, we covered the structures of the cell. And remember, I showed y'all the drawing, the simple drawing we learned when we were in like elementary school or
Yes.
junior high, how simple the cell was. Well, that's what everybody understood it at the time. And it even led to, one of the most premier microbiologists of the time, back in the 60s, to announce, we've seen all there is to see, and we don't see evidence of God. But you know what he did do? He didn't quit doing his research into the structures of the cell. And if y'all watched not too long ago one of our Creation Corner episodes, it showed you about the little motor and showed you about the walking feet and the thing that creates the path it walks on out in front of it as it's walking, carrying packets of energy that need to go from one part of the cell to the other. Remember all that?
You were wanting to talk about the shroud, though?
I am. My point simply being is that same scientist who in the 1960s, I think it was like 1969, I showed y'all the copy of the magazine that the announcement was made in, because he kept studying and he said, wow, there's a lot more here than we used to think it was. And so he said, well, I may not believe in the Judeo-Christian God. He said, but I can tell you this, we're not here by accident. There was a designer, there was a creator. What I now know about cellular structure is so complex, there's no way it got here by accident. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now let's apply that to the Shroud of Turin. In the 1980s, they examined it and said, oh, it's fake, it's forgery, and, it doesn't even date right, blah, blah, blah. You ought to see the evidence, because it is the Catholic Church has allowed, and even though the Catholic Church does not own the shroud, it's in safekeeping with the church at the present time. They allowed the shroud to continue to be studied.
Yeah. And
we're going to post that video. And so when Sonora talks about the fact that, just like all the rest of us, we thought, man, they had to get him in there quick. They had to get that. No, they were pretty meticulous. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they were pretty meticulous. Now, they were men. They weren't gentle, I'm sure. They were doing the best they could.
They were aware of the traditions that were required for a Jewish burial, though. They were religious people.
Exactly.
So.
But my point is, you need to watch this video. Now, I'm not saying it's real.
Yeah.
You're not saying it's real. But you ought to see the evidence.
Interesting.
That modern science has now given us, that nobody's disputing what the science says about that Shroud of Turin. And because of how the Shroud of Turin and the head cloth, which most people don't even mention, and the head cloth were arranged, and the results of what appears on the burial cloth and the head cloth, they didn't just throw a body in there on that bench. It was a very well laid out situation.
Right.
So anyway, we're going to post that video on Invisible Things Facebook page.
Let's see. Trying to remember how to get out of here.
Well, anyway, we love y'all. Thank y'all for joining us. Hope y'all got something out of tonight.
Yeah.
Watch the video we're fixing to post.
And also, what do we always say? Have the Berean spirit.
Have the Berean spirit. Don't trust it just because it came out of our mouths. You do your own research.
Yep, to see if what we're saying is true.
See you next week, Lord willing.
Okay, bye-bye.
Love y'all.